chances are how you're lifting your fingers at the piano is probably completely wrong, and here's why. Now in this video, I'm not only going to show you what incorrectly lifting the fingers looks like, but I'm also going to show you what correctly looking the fingers looks like and what to look out for, so make sure you watch all the way to the end of the video. Now the first thing we have to do is we have to understand why it is important how we lift our fingers. And it's actually quite simple. If we are, for instance, lifting our fingers way too high, we could all understand that that's a waste of effort, or it's sort of just, throwing lots of motion away. And when it comes to playing fast or really delicate sort of passage work, it's actually going to slow us down and make things more difficult. And if you're in a habit of, for instance, lifting your fingers really high or lifting them in weird ways, which we'll get to in a moment, that's actually going to make it really, really difficult to not do that when you're playing really intricate passage work. So this is a really important concept. Now let's go ahead and look at what lifting the fingers incorrectly looks like. Now all of these are very awkward and can cause issues. And the first one is lifting the fingers sort of from the nail joint. So on your finger, you have all of these different knuckle joints. And when I say the nail joint, I mean this first joint on our finger. And it kind of looks like this. So when I lift the finger, this joint actually pulls in, and it almost looks like my finger is being sort of like lifted from that joint. And so it kind of looks like this, like when I lift my fingers, very sort of like tense and awkward. And we can realize that I'm not really lifting from that joint in that sense, but it kind of looks like I am. So I'm kind of like scrunching the fingers like that, okay? And this is really bad because it's a very tense motion. You can just lift your fingers like this and notice how tense your hand is. So when we lift our fingers, we don't want it to feel tense or anything like that. The second incorrect way of lifting the fingers is straight out. So sometimes I'll see people and they lift their finger like this. So the finger goes completely straight when they lift their finger, and then it comes down curved, or sometimes it actually comes down flat like this. Okay, so when we lift our fingers, we don't want to straighten out the finger, because what that's doing is we have a lifting motion and then we have a straightening motion. They're actually two separate sort of motions. We're using different muscles, and so again, it's just extra effort to do things that don't really help us when it comes to playing the piano. The next way of incorrectly lifting the fingers is one that I've already mentioned, and that's lifting them too high. So if I'm going to say play a scale, I actually don't really need to lift my fingers much at all, because the keys are going down, they're not going up. So there's not really much of a point of lifting really high unless I'm releasing notes, like if I'm playing more non-legato or something like that. But in which case, we don't really want to lift the fingers really high. We want to keep them pretty close to the keys. Okay, so as I lift, my finger stays pretty close to the keys. I don't really need to lift my finger like that. Again, it's a waste of effort in playing fast or really delicate or intricate passage work. This is going to make it much more difficult. Now, the last way of incorrectly lifting the fingers that we're going to talk about here is drawing the fingers in. So it kind of looks like this. People they'll sort of lift and pull the finger in. And this is not just specifically lifting, it's how we lift, and basically more of just like how we use the finger. But it's sort of it's almost like this sort of petting motion with the finger. Okay, so we lift and we draw the finger in it. And I see this all the time. It's this sort of thing. And again, it's a little bit different because it's not just a lifting motion, it's just how we use the fingers. But I think it's important to talk about because it's such a common thing that I see. Now let's go ahead and talk about how to correctly lift the fingers so that we can always use our fingers at the keyboard in a very efficient, easy manner. Now, the first thing that we have to talk about is we want to lift our fingers from this main knuckle joint on our hand. So you can see, this main knuckle joint, sort of where my hand starts and my fingers sort of stop, if you will. That's where we want to lift the finger. So we always want to feel like we're lifting the finger from this joint. So you can see these other joints are not really moving much, okay? And we'll come back to that in a minute. But this is where I'm lifting the fingers from. So I could actually tap all of my fingers, and I'm just moving from that main knuckle joint. And the second thing that we want to look out for is the finger should stay in a slightly curved state. So it's kind of like these other joints are not really moving, okay? So see, if I do this, I can tap the finger, and you can actually see that these joints are not really moving. So we don't have that excess motion that's not really doing anything for us. Now, the next point that we want to talk about is the finger should go straight up and down. And what I mean by that is if I take the tip of my finger and I draw a line from where it's touching the key to where it ends up, it's pretty much just straight above that, okay? Now, I know it's not exactly, it's maybe slightly in front here, but the point is that I'm not doing this. See how that's not straight up and down? It's sort of like it comes way back here. So I want to think of the fingertips as going like straight up and down when they do that, okay? That's very important. The next thing that we have to look out for is generally we want the fingers to be very close to the keys, okay? So if I was to play, you can see that my fingers are staying very close to the keys. If I play that again, you can see my fingers are staying very close to the keys, okay? And I already basically alluded to that, but we still want to think about this, okay? That thing that I mentioned where the keys go down, they don't go up, it seems kind of obvious, and yet we have so much information, and so many times teachers tell their students to lift the fingers. Why do we need to do that? I mean, it's kind of pointless if you think about it, okay? The last thing that we want to talk about here is that sometimes, okay, this is going to seem to contradict what I just said, but just hear me out. Sometimes we can lift the fingers higher, but it has to be purposeful. So I was teaching a student the other day, and they were, every time they used a finger, it was this like huge motion like this, okay? And sometimes we might want that if we decide, you know, I think I get a better sound if I do that, or something like that. That's fine. Or if we're playing non-legato, more of like a, you know, sort of like Baroque, like Bach touch or something like that, I might want to have, you know, more active fingers or something like that. But that's okay, but it has to be purposeful. If you actually can't play the piano and just keep your fingers really close to the keys, that's an issue. Now, I find that it's helpful when teaching my students with this, that it's easiest to think of working on maybe one or two of these concepts, and then once you sort of start to get those, move on to another concept. So for instance, you could start with thinking about lifting from the main knuckle joint and the finger being slightly curved, which will also sort of help with that idea of the finger going straight up and down. You can just focus on those things. Once you start getting that, then you can say, okay, now I'm gonna work on keeping the fingers really close to the keys, okay, etc. So I hope that that was interesting, informative, and answered any questions you might have about how to lift the fingers. But if you have more questions, go ahead and put them in the comments down below. Always love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.